Hey there, everybody. Welcome back to The Great Retention with Camber Parker, sponsored by TheoProKnow. I'm Camber, your young professional expert and founder of TheoProKnow, where we bring you the answers you need to know about how to hire and retain the best talent, starting with the young professionals you work with. There are a lot of young professional fish in the sea, but how do you catch them? And what do you do once you reel them in? That's where we come in. Today, I am excited to have George Campbell join us, managing partner at Campbell Teague, a boutique law firm in Greenville, South Carolina. While George and I only met recently, I was inspired by his vision and attention to young professional retention at his firm. His encouragement of his staff to have an entrepreneurial spirit was what intrigued me the most, so I invited him to be on the show to share his best practices and more. George, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Camber.
So happy to have you. And I want to do what I like to call a lightning round.
Okay.
So just answer, as quick as possible, which I know might be a little difficult. So it's okay if we go over, but tell us a little bit more about your background, whether that's personal or professional. Would love to share with the audience just so they can get a better feel for who you are.
Sure. So I'm a lawyer by training. I was born here in Greenville and grew up in South Georgia. And after school, came back, started my career as a prosecutor. And then, as I tell people, I've turned into a lawyer with a bad habit of turnaround management. And so I've gone back and forth from business and law many times, usually restructuring distressed companies, but also working with entrepreneurial ventures or startup companies. And now we're pretty much focused on growing our law firm to support that ecosystem with my law partner who I went to Furman with. So that's what we do, a little bit of everything that companies need. Great.
And I know that you moved to Spain for a little while. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, we spent COVID in Spain and went over there to do a restructuring of a company that was bought out of bankruptcy. And so it was a great experience for us, for me professionally and also for the family. The kids are now fluent in Spanish, which was always a goal of mine, and could not have been a better experience.
And what happened with the business here while you were over there? It just kind of kept moving. You have about 12, 13 employees now. So what did that look like?
We started our law firm to be remote first from day one. If it doesn't work on a mobile device, we don't use the technology. So everything is structured around not being tied to a physical location. That doesn't mean we don't use our office, but it means we have the flexibility. And then when COVID hit, everyone just went home and kept working. We didn't have any interruptions, but we had that capability, and I had an amazing law partner who was able to keep everything going. So Jordan did a wonderful job continuing to grow the firm. And because of our technology platforms, I was able to keep up with everything and be available as needed.
Well, I think that theme will probably pop up again in our conversation. So we'll move on, but I do want to talk about technology a little bit later. Can you share a memorable experience that you've had working with a young professional or young professionals in your career? And for those in the audience that might not know, by definition, a young professional is 21 to 39 years old. So I believe you're a young professional yourself.
Technically,
Did you tell me that?
I still qualify.
Okay. So tell us a little bit more about those experiences.
It's hard to give you a pinpointed experience with a young professional, but the biggest thing I have seen is their gravitation toward mentorship and the ability to learn practical skills. And we can talk about it more later, but the biggest thing I have found bringing kids out of college or out of school is the total lack of preparation that the modern education system provides. They're not ready for work. And if they don't have access to good mentorship who will invest in their career, they feel lost. And so the most rewarding experiences I've had is when I can work together with a young professional, usually a student straight out of school or someone who's even still in school, and teach them practically how to do something. And they just love it. And you're amazed by what they're able to do.
Great. You know that today, one of the main topics is, of course, talking about the young professional generation, which includes the Gen Z and millennials. So to set the stage, can you share why these generations have become more entrepreneurial? You mentioned in our last conversation, they're just very entrepreneurial in nature, and you really implement that at your practice. But can you tell us a little bit more about why that is and what has caused this?
I think it's a multitude of factors, starting with, if you take my generation, we're either the granddaddies of the millennials or the babies of Gen X. And we're in this tweener zone. But we came of age during the Great Recession. We all got kicked in the teeth. We had to figure it out. So a lot of entrepreneurship started there. You also have seen the ease and ability to start a business. I can tell you that most people have no idea how easy it is in the United States to start a business compared with other countries. So if someone wants to try something, they can. I also think that people just don't want to be stuck in a large corporate environment where they see limited growth trajectory. If their opportunities are not well defined by a company, you're going to have a hard time retaining young people because they want to see, where am I going? A lot of people criticize young professionals today because they think they try to jump too fast. They want to grow too fast. They want to be CEO at 25 because they see tech bros doing it in Silicon Valley. I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think they just want to know, what's my future going to look like? Because probably for our parents' generation, the deal was you take care of the company will take care of you, and largely you could rely on that. But then we realized that defined benefit plans were a pipe dream. They're not sustainable long term. And so companies quit taking care of their employees at the same level. And now you've got to figure out, okay, how do I paint a picture, which requires leadership, to say, here's where the company's going. Here's how you fit into that picture. Here are the opportunities for you here. And then the final thing is recognizing that even if someone doesn't stay with you for 40 years, that's okay. If you invest in them, they repay the investment, they help you get your company to the next level, and then you help them move on to the next stage of their career. I don't think there's much better that a company could have than a group of well-placed alumni scattered about the marketplace who can help them refer business or grow their company from the outside.
Absolutely. And I actually listened to a podcast recently that shared a great practice for companies is to almost create what they call that alumni base after they've moved on, and even doing something like posting, a congratulations when they leave a company. And obviously it depends on the reasons for them leaving, but it shows that you've invested in them enough where they can graduate onto their career if it's not at that company. So I thought that was a really interesting angle. And it's something I've definitely actually recommended to clients based on, again, the situation. But I think a lot of what you just mentioned is a great segue into the next question, which is, what are you doing as a leader for your business to retain young professionals? Because when we spoke last, I was, again, like I said earlier, very intrigued by some of the opportunities that you give that I think are really a stark contrast to a lot of other companies right now.
The main thing is we tell them this is never going to be a what's next boss kind of job. We expect them to figure it out. And we want our team to understand that you're a problem solver. Especially in our world of legal services, one of the worst things about lawyers is they just tell you what the law is. But our clients are businesses, usually growth companies. They're trying to get from point A to point B. So they want to know, how do I solve this problem or achieve this goal without stepping in something? So we empower them to say, look, we're going to provide the guardrails for you here, but we want you to make decisions. And if you have an issue, don't come to us with just a question. Come to me with a proposed solution. I'll tell you if it's right or wrong, or if we need to change something. But we really try to empower them to make decisions. We spend a lot of time focusing on our core values, which are integrity, autonomy, ingenuity, and fitness. The integrity is number one. We're not going to compromise it. We'll shut the business down if anyone asks us to. I'm not going to do it. And we expect everyone to meet that standard exacting. The autonomy is where we talked about the ability to make your own decisions. We're remote first. People are allowed to get their stuff done. We don't look at inputs unless there's a problem with outputs. So we set clear expectations about what the outputs need to be, what they need as the basic minimum, and where they need to be in terms of outputs to be successful. And we try to define that to a numerical score, not for the sake of having a number, but so that there's no room for miscommunication, debate, or opinion. Everyone knows that a pen is a pen, and we all understand what a good pen looks like. The ingenuity is also the creativity. We want them to bring creative solutions to the table, and especially not just saying, well, we've always done it this way. Well, why? Why is that the way? And I think most of the young professionals today are very interested in that. They're curious about new ways of doing things. But one of the things you learn as a young professional is how very old are all new ideas. And if it's a lot of times it's almost impossible that you've had an original thought.
Right.
Most people have had that before, but questioning that will give you a better grasp of concepts. And the last thing is fitness. And that's not just physical fitness, but also mental and spiritual. Because life is hard. Work is hard. And unless we encourage people to go every day in the afternoon, 4:00, we want you out the door to exercise. If you have more stuff to do, you've got your laptop, you can log in later tonight. But if you're not physically fit, it's very hard to be mentally and spiritually fit. And if you're in a knowledge economy, you're going to have a certain level of resilience and willingness to not quit, to persevere through a challenge. And I think that has really helped the young professionals because, one, they're interested in it, but two, it teaches them that you can't just roll over. You got to be able to stick with it.
Absolutely. And something I didn't mention before, your entire firm is made up of young professionals, correct?
That's right. Yeah.
So
I'm the oldest employee.
You're the oldest. Okay. Well, I think that all of what you just shared, those core values, I think that's a little different than what you normally see in a law firm because normally you don't hear fitness associated with any law firms. And again, just being so different, I guess, as a law firm, which is a good different. What would you say that being entrepreneurial has done for your business? Because again, that's a difference that you don't normally hear and acknowledge with law firms. So what are some of the hiring or recruiting benefits that come with being entrepreneurial focused? So you've already shared a little bit about what you offer, but outside of that, what is something that you encourage your staff to do to be more entrepreneurial?
We encourage them to figure out what they want to work on. What type of business do you want to do? We really have an allergy to the term practice areas. And also what I would phrase is the term deal monkeys, who are purely transactional lawyers who've never been in a courtroom. The problem with that is you're too far separated from what we call contact with the ground or reality. Because at the end of the day, every contract you write, every deal, every policy only matters in litigation. That's the ultimate judge of whether something's right or wrong. Up to that point, it's just an opinion. And so everyone has to litigate, even if they don't like it, but then everyone has to do multiple things. And this trend towards specialization at the expense of polyvalence has really created a problem because people are isolated in silos without any frame of reference of how they fit into a bigger picture or the consequences of their actions. So we encourage people to be entrepreneurial. They have to stay in contact with reality, but find what you're interested in. You don't have to stick to one lane of employment law. We have one lawyer who was in Boston previously at a large firm, moved back to South Carolina, has a wealth of experience in employment law, but now she's doing a ton of work in Web3 and cryptocurrency work with clients all over the globe and loving every minute of it because she was able to jump outside of her lane and wasn't told, okay, you got to sign to this practice group. You've got to stay in this lane. You're going to be an expert in employment law until you're 65 and retire. First of all, nobody wants to do that. Second of all, young professionals are especially scared of doing that. And I think having that polyvalence is very important because as we have seen in our generation, you have to be able to reinvent yourself.
I think so too. And what I heard, a really big takeaway from that was you're just catering to their skills and interests. So I see way too many times, more often than not, companies just have their young professionals do something because it's what people have always done and doesn't matter if it's catered to their skill sets or not. I've been a victim of that myself. And it was one of the reasons I left my first job was because I hated what I was doing and I wasn't getting any opportunities to do anything outside of my lane or outside of my silo. So another very important point. Since you have worked with so many young professionals throughout the course of your career, and again, being one yourself, what are some of the other key findings that young professionals really want and need to be successful in the workplace that we haven't already mentioned?
I think I would go back to that idea of mentorship, which is the most abused and ill-defined term. And I think a lot of people pay lip service to it, but they don't really do it. It's hard to find a good mentor. I don't know your experience, but I've had some really good mentors and I've had some awful mentors who just wanted to check a box. But what I have seen is an appalling lack of preparation by the university system in preparing people for work. They are indoctrinated with theory and ideology and very rarely any real practical experience. And I talked to a dean of a law school some years back, and I asked, are you seeing more retired lawyers wanting to come back and teach practical courses? She said, no, we don't want them. The job's too academic. And I was just floored by that. But I've also seen that in other universities, not just law schools, where we're going to send you to school for 4 years. We're going to pay a ton of money for that 4-year commitment. And then you're going to graduate and have no real idea how to do any work whatsoever. Not to mention the fact that we have a terrible time finding anybody with hard skills or trades to be able to build anything, like electricians and plumbers and welders. But in the knowledge economy as well, going and working for someone is going to give you far more ability to enter the workforce than just, coming straight out of school and getting a job. And I think that where we've been most successful is bringing in interns who are still in school, working with them, training them, and sort of growing our own talent versus trying to adapt bad habits that were learned in another organization that specifically didn't accommodate the generational preferences of young professionals, of wanting to be able to use their creativity and their talents, wanting to be able to know where my opportunities lie, how I fit into the vision of this company. Open and transparent communication. I mean, these are not hard things. And I don't know why so many companies struggle with them, because at the end of the day, if you just do what's right, tell the truth, and take care of your people, life's pretty easy, whether they're a young professional or a boomer. It doesn't matter. But somewhere along the way, things got off the rails. And I think a lot of it is just driven by fear. Social media contributes to that. Investor pressure contributes to that. People are afraid of messing up. They're afraid of being criticized. They don't want to get hammered on Twitter or Facebook or LinkedIn. They don't want to get sued. There's just a lot of fear in employers in general right now of saying something that's not politically correct or anything else. But if you're doing the right thing and you don't believe that there's no such thing as an absolute truth, I mean, there is a right or wrong. I think that it's pretty easy to make a successful environment for young professionals. I
think so too. And a lot of times what I'm doing with companies is not rocket science. I keep telling people, people are paying me to do this. But really, if you just treat people well and really respect them, I think it all comes down to respect, right? Yeah. Just understanding that while you and I might not have the same beliefs, we can still work together if we're respectful of each other. And I think that is an area of concern right now at companies. You covered a lot there. And so I do want to unpack.
Sorry.
No, I want to unpack with you. I have a lot of notes here. You mentioned, obviously, this issue with the university system and education. You mentioned one of the solutions being, bringing in interns, training them, giving them those tangible skills that they can take into the workplace. What other solutions are there for this? And we could have a whole episode on this.
Oh, yeah. But how much time you got?
In 1 minute or less.
From the company's perspective?
From the company perspective, yes.
Yeah, I think I would definitely hire interns. That's where you're going to find your best talent, and you're able to staff people in the areas that fit their skill sets. Because you can go ahead and instead of wasting your onboarding time trying to catch someone up to speed from scratch, you're bringing in someone who already knows the company culture. They already know their way around the office and the systems. You've already identified where their talents are. So to use a football analogy, you're not putting a wide receiver at nose guard. And then you're setting yourself up for so much more success with that employee rather than having to spend, the first 9 days, nobody knows what they're doing. Then the next 9 days, you're trying to find a spot. And then the last 9 days, the employee's disillusioned and you don't think they're performing, but it's because they're in the wrong position and they're working with the wrong people. You can avoid all that stuff in a low risk position with an intern where they're working for very reasonable wages, if not for free, because they want the experience. So I think doing that, and we also implemented something that was more useful pre-COVID, before everybody figured out how to use Zoom, but we don't take resumes. In the interview process, we put a job posting up. We have a short Google form that says, fill out your name, address, and phone number. Here's a link to your LinkedIn profile. Record a 3-minute video of who you are, why you want to work here, and something unique about you. You'd be amazed how much more you can learn from a 3-minute video than you can from a resume, which is so easy to misunderstand or fudge or do everything else. So through that, we get a good sense, and then we would schedule a video call, interview them, and then we give them a homework assignment, paid, and say, look, here's a few $100. Here's a homework assignment. This is the definition of success. Here's the information you need. Go.
Cool.
And then we get a chance to work with them and just see, can they read and write? Can they articulate and structure a problem? Can they solve the problem? Do they ask intelligent questions? And do they fit generally with your work style? Or are they responsive? Do they pay attention to detail? All those things that are important to us and to many other employers.
Mm-hmm.
So by doing that, we've already done a huge amount of screening beyond what your typical HR department does, which is sift through resumes with no real frame of reference of how accurate those are. Pick somebody out of a hat because they either check a box or fit a particular need. And then the last thing I'll add on to that is hiring people you want to work with is more important than filling your particular growth strategy. So to put that another way, if I say, all right, I need a lawyer, an employment lawyer who's going to work in a DC office because this is where our clients have a need. But then I wind up finding a securities lawyer in Chicago who's very bright, fits our core culture, is entrepreneurial, wants to be a part of what we're doing. Well, we just hired that guy. Now we have a Chicago office, even though that was not on the growth plan. So when you find good people, hire them and figure out how to make it work. And I think if you find good people and treat them right, they will lead you to success.
I 100% agree. And I think that we are going to start seeing just more and more talent challenges as the Gen Xers and the boomers start to retire. And so finding good talent like that and keeping them is going to be really critical. So what other challenges do you think we'll face as we start to see more of those leaders retire and really trying to emerge this young professional generation as leaders?
It goes back to the mentorship question on preparation for leadership. Are you preparing people to take over in leadership positions? Most times in almost every business I've ever seen, people hold on too long. Very rare do you have leaders who set things up for success, pass the baton, and quietly disappear before anybody knows they're gone. As you've probably heard before, that's the mark of good leadership, is they care more about the longevity of the institution than their own personal preference. So that, I think, is the big thing that needs to happen very quickly in almost every company, is preparing for those retirements. The other thing that's going to be interesting is what happens with this recession. You can't print $2 trillion and not have it go somewhere. And the inflation that we're seeing, I don't think is going to abate anytime soon. And if the Fed does continue to tighten, there's a huge risk of an overcorrection because it's almost like chasing altitude. You can't do that without a consistent glide slope. So I think how that sorts out is going to be difficult for both leaders, employers, but also employees, because these young professionals have never gotten a good kick in the teeth economically. Do they have the mentorship to respond to that? Do they have the resilience to do that? Do they understand that that might change their job prospects? And I think it's going to be a very uneven distribution, because there are certain areas where it's going to be a tight labor market. It's going to be very hard to find talent, but then there are going to be others where there's going to be plenty of people to go around and a lot of restructurings and layoffs and bad things that we haven't seen in almost 14 years.
Right.
So I don't know how that's going to go down, but if you're not prepared and you're not training leaders and empowering people and you're trying to rely on boomers who are retiring to make all the leadership decisions, that's a recipe for trouble, I think.
There's going to be a lot of trouble. And myself personally, I have many mentors who have really kind of guided me, because I took my business full time right when uncertainty about the economy started to come out, right? And that was really scary for me, because I'm 26 and I've never experienced a recession professionally. I've been around for one, but I was not professional yet when I experienced that, when I saw my parents experience that. And so this will be a very monumental years for many young professionals, but a lot of us have seen recessions, whether we've experienced them or not. And so the research shows that we are seeking those jobs that have financial stability, because we know that we've seen what happens sometimes really negatively in our own lives. And so I think that's an interesting piece to what you have shared, because I do think that companies, we're going to see some that are laying off. We've already seen a lot of big companies do that. But there will be companies that thrive, right? There's always companies that during some kind of big economic movement that do thrive, because we had the pandemic and Peloton went crazy, right?
Yeah.
There's always those.
And now their stock's going to zero.
Right. And now they're not in a good position. So, I mean, things ebb and flow. But to your point, I just think that there are going to be many challenges that talent, this conversation of talent is not going away anytime soon. And so with the final minutes that we have remaining, tell us any other advice for businesses that are watching or listening that we haven't covered today so far.
I think we've covered most of it. And the most important thing is the basic dignity of a human being. Treat people right and do the right thing. Be honest and open. I think that's one of the hardest things for young professionals is getting them used to having those frank in-person conversations, because generationally, most of the way folks in their 20s have communicated a lot was on Instagram, social media, Snapchat. That's just how the basic friend conversation goes. It's not like my generation where we still had to ride the bike around the neighborhood or call a landline and talk to someone's mom before we could speak to our buddy. But getting them prepared to have those honest in-person conversations, learning how to communicate and articulate what they're trying to do in person, face-to-face is very important. Because when these stressful situations arise, whether it's an economic downturn or you're trying to navigate the company through a difficult situation or an HR problem or anything else, training these young people to have that communication set is critical. Because if you're not communicating, you're going to wind up in the Tower of Babel and nothing gets done. The whole thing collapses. So I think that would be the last piece beyond the mentorship, treating them right, and then training the communication so that they're able to communicate well. They're able to communicate with not just inside the company, but outside the company with your customers and vendors and any other stakeholders. They'll represent you well, and I think you'll be in a much better position.
Well, I think that's a great way to end this episode. Thank you so much for your time and for sharing your best practices with us today, George.
Thank you, Camber.
Thank you again for joining us today on The Great Retention with Campbell Parker. Before you go, remember this. Young professionals make up nearly half of the workforce today, and that is expected to jump at a rapid pace in this decade. What will you do as business leaders to help them become the next great leaders we need for the future? Join us next time for more information on how to recruit and retain young professionals. And if you enjoyed this episode, please leave us a rating on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts. This helps others know where to find episodes about this topic. And don't forget to share with your coworkers, most importantly. Thanks again, and we'll see you next time.